Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today I want to do something special and I've brought a special guest as well here today. We're going to talk about tier list, but we're not going to do just a standard tier list. We're actually going to do a little bit of an interesting one here where we're combining two different tier lists. The first tier list will be the ladder one. It's the one that you see on the left side here. And the right one will be the one for tournaments, as we are going to talk about how tournament civs differ from the ladder civs. So whilst they're the same civs, they perform differently and have different purposes. I brought a special guest, Myriad. Welcome to the video. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you for having me. I look forward to this very much.
It's going to be a lot of fun. And we last met at King of the North, and we had a wonderful time casting together. If you guys are interested in watching that, I'll put that down in the description so you can check that out as well. That was a wonderful experience. What do you think about English in the current meta on English in Season 8?
So English right now reminds me a little bit of Rus, actually, in the sense that in terms of versatility, they can do a lot of things, I would say. They have a lot of options available to them. Obviously, you have the classic 2TC, Abbey of Kings into White Tower. That's what most people will come across, even now after the nerfs to it. But of course, standard Council Hall play in the past, they can do that as well, very well. To be aggressive with longbows and spears. The only real thing they can't do that well is Fast Castle. I'm sure you'd agree.
Fast Castle is definitely a rough one. I feel like English is always going to be, in that context of the Fast Castle, more timing dependent. So that would be out of something like a council push, where people are doing longbows and spears. Then they've done the damage, but they can't actually finish the game in that situation, so they choose either to go for rams or they go for the castle age. That's sort of the two dimensions, right? Where would you put English currently in ladder, if you were to just go for it right now?
I would say that they are an A-tier civilization right now. So due to their versatility, they can play any age very well, their weakest age being castle. But there's no situations where they really shine as the best pick on any real map, I would say. They're either on the same level as some civs on some maps or slightly below. But they're never the number one pick on any map, I'd say. It's their versatility, sort of like Rus has been for quite a long time now. That means that they'll be a solid pick on pretty much every map. So their simpleness in understanding can make it much easier for players to learn. So I would say they're one of the best civs to one trick on the ladder in order if someone's goal is to just climb high or just to learn the game through one civ initially. English is very, very good at that. I've done it myself when I first started with them. So due to all of these things, I would say A tier.
I do agree with you on that one. A tier is pretty comfortable spot to be in for a lot of the civs that we're probably going to talk about today. English is just one of those civs that can do so many things, like you said. They're very versatile, but they're not just like the best at any of them. Like, they're good in water, they're good on the rush, they're good at the standard aggression or the boomy playstyle. The one thing that they're not like super strong in is the fast castling, because English just in general thrives better when they're set up. They're also one of those civs that are picked very frequently as the first 6 civilizations, sometimes even quicker, and I've even seen some pros ban them in tournaments. So if we were to take a shot as well here at the tournament play, I'm gonna actually say, personally, and you can disagree with me if you want to, I feel like English kind of fits in the same position, because even though we have these S-tier civs that are always banned or picked in the tournament play, and we have these counter civs that are really, really strong against specific civs that we can try to draft for, English just comes across as a civ that doesn't have that many bad matchups, but if it's on a bad map for English, you're just not going to go for it anyways. So in the context of the draft, I feel like they're a very good civ to have, because what you'll find is that when you're drafting civs like Rus, English, and probably like HRE as well, like these civs are annoying to draft into with civs like Mongols or let's say French or something like that. And it's just where we see civs like English have a special role in the draft. Won't you agree?
I would agree. I would say, obviously, it's our first civ so far, so that won't become apparent yet. I would say they're slightly actually worse in tournament play than ladder.
Yeah.
And you mentioned pretty much all of the reasons for that. Of course, as we mentioned, they're just a very solid, versatile pick. It's a great civ just to have in your pool, which can kind of fit in anywhere, and can be a comfort pick. It's a safe pick on most maps. It will do fine. But obviously, in tournament play, as you mentioned yourself, when it comes to drafting, you usually want to get the best civs first. Relative to the maps and to the opponent's picks as well. And English can fit amongst them, but it's never, it's quite rarely ever your first pick or even your second pick sometimes, right? Usually one the high priorities first, and then quite often you'll find that people start picking sort of more versatile civs that can run on most maps and that are safe picks and can't really get counted. English being one of them. They have bad matchups, but none are, cripplingly bad, I would say, anymore. So A tier for now, I absolutely agree with it for sure.
Jumping into the next civilization is going to be French, and I would like to probably start off by saying that, contrary to the popular belief that French is currently one of the worst civilizations, I'm going to say that they aren't the worst. I think French has some utility, and at the high level play, they can usually perform pretty well on open maps. It's not typically one of those civs that you would like to play, whether it's ladder or in tournaments. But French, currently, as they are conceptualized at the moment, is very knight heavy. And I think something that people need to realize with them is they're actually supposed to be a knight civ that is a big focus on archer play. Because what a lot of people will instinctually do when they play against French on ladder is make a ton of spears. But the problem is, people keep making knights, whereas they should probably have like 2-3 archer ranges. Just full pumping archers. What do you think about French?
I think one aspect of French that is quite overlooked by a lot of people is the keep discount bonus on any archery ranges and stables nearby, which very notably does not apply to barracks. Now, the bonus in terms of discount, which can also be upgraded with enlistment incentives, I believe it's called, is a very powerful bonus and saves you a lot of resources. But it quite clearly very heavily inspires you to go into Archer Calf, right? And the trouble is that, quite often you will want to be running, whether it be spears or men-at-arms in some games, but mainly spears you'll find can be quite useful even as French. But obviously it can be difficult to switch into that effectively when essentially one of your biggest, well, the biggest economic bonus you have is locked purely to these two production buildings, and that does make you a little bit one-dimensional. In feudal play, I think they are quite powerful without a doubt. I mean, what you said about having just a few knights initially and transferring into further more archery ranges as opposed to knights is definitely the right way to play. Because often the strength of French, and that has been a strength since its inception as a civ, really since the start of the game, was the fact that due to your access to the strongest knights in the game in feudal age and later on, you are able to keep your opponent contained on their side of the map, and that gives you the ability to do quite a few things behind it, whether it go on exposed resources like deer or boar, of course. But the reality is they do struggle nowadays. It's just like the problem is they've done the exact same thing every meta since their start, essentially. There's no real shift in their strategy. I mean, the only real flexibility you have available is either full-on aggression or 2TC, essentially, right? And then aggression.
Right.
Or castle behind it. So, like, they're very one-dimensional in their playstyle. They can have some good moments. Obviously, the knight's very strong. Arbaletria very strong in Castle Age and Post. But personally, I would look to put them in C tier, personally.
I agree with you. I think C tier is quite comfortable at this stage of the tier list to put them in. Yeah. I would definitely not put them in D tier because I think that's a little bit preemptive to do. It could be something we might have to do later, but I think for a tier list for ladder play, C tier is absolutely fine. Again, we have to remember with these civs, in my mind at least, that you can pick any civ and go to Conqueror with it, but that doesn't mean that it scales as well with your skill. So let's try to understand that concept. So if you are a gold player and you pick a civ like English, that's going to be pretty comfortable for you because it's quite forgiving to play them, unless you're playing super aggressive and you do some mistakes with movement. In general, it's going to be pretty comfortable versus playing a civ like Chinese, because your skill scales way better with that civ. That means, like, at the higher level, it feels like there's so much more you can do compared to if you were playing a civ that doesn't scale as much.
Yeah.
I think French is one of those civs that don't scale. It's one of those where, yes, you can be an incredibly good player, but the civ plays out the same. It's not like you see Chinese at the diamond level, where it might just be 2DC song most games, whereas at the highest level, people are doing Imperial Academy Archer push. Those are two very different ways of playing one civilization. And this was not to just talk about Chinese, but it's just as an example of a civ that's quite opposite in terms of scalability. Do you agree that French for the tournament play, in relation to that idea, is more like a D tier civ?
Yes, I would agree. Worse in tournament play for sure. Like you said yourself, focusing on only one civ in ladder play can get you quite far. And even with something that's generally weaker, like French, that can be true. I do think, I do agree with what you said, that French being quite one-dimensional in their play and not scaling well up the ranks in terms of the options you have available to you is a limiting factor. But they can be very good at teaching a player to be aggressive, I would say.
Yep.
Finding angles of charge with the knights, denying enemy resources. I think French can be very good at teaching you that those kind of concepts on the ladder as you get better. Of course, tournament play is very different. Assuming players have a good grasp of the game in terms of understanding and skill here. The truth is, French, knight civs are strong. There's no denying that, but the reality is French is the weakest of the knight civs we have currently.
Yeah.
And there's just so many better options in tournament play. Like pretty much very often you've seen for the last months now, French will usually be people's last pick or second to last pick when they actually don't have better options left, right?
Yeah.
They're good on open maps, like you said yourself. That's where they shine the most. Issue is, there's limited open maps, and even then, there's so many other great civs that are fantastic on open maps. They have either better eco, better units, just better bonuses in general that helps them deal with French. The predictability works against them quite severely in tournament games. It's so hard to engage into space, and then sure, you have archers available to you, but the archers are nothing special. So if you're facing something like Abba, who not only has better space than your average space, but better archers than you if they go military wing, as well as better eco, then you're going to really struggle to actually make a decisive push. And then obviously the later the game goes, the worse it gets for you in terms of scaling.
And it's just also one of those civs that have one of the most amount of bad matchups, like Ottomans, Malians, maybe Abbasid, Mongols is also rough. There are a bunch of these matchups where it feels very, very rough from the early game on, and it can be very difficult to play out that standard style. So it is important to adopt different ideas, and that's sometimes very, very difficult, I feel.
The main trap you fall into with French that you can't really get out of is the fact that in tournament games, at least, is you'll often find that the opponent's civ just simply has better eco and outscales you, which means the pressure is on you to do some damage in feudal.
Yeah.
And then if you do some, then that's great. Suddenly you're actually, even to your opponent in terms of economic prowess. Whereas with other civs, you'd be ahead at that point. But then if you just don't manage to get any kind of aggression, you're just kind of fizzle out like a candle almost.
Yeah.
You just get overwhelmed and outmassed by stronger infantry composition, perhaps.
The next civ is HRE, and my take on HRE at the moment is HRE is one of those civs that kind of does the same thing as English, but better. It's able to do fuel aggression. It's able to do fast castle. It's phenomenal on water. It's phenomenal at adaptability. And it's all due to the fact their economy is quite overtuned, in my opinion. It means that HRE currently is one of those civs for ladder play that you could play it out with feudal aggression and just get to conquer 3 in like a week if you are like a diamond player. Because if you get really, really good at just doing that, you're fine. But if you were to then also keep practicing and get good as a player and just sort of adopt the different styles and figure out through the decision making when to do what, HRE is so forgiving because of the economy that you could just do all those things. I would personally put HRE up in the S tier right now, as I think HRE is probably the best civ in the game at the moment.
I certainly agree on the S tier. As you said yourself, the power of their aggression in feudal is almost unmatched, I think, to be honest, by any civ in the game. The 40% eco boost from Aachen with a prelate inside of it is just insane, to be honest. You're able to pump, units at an exponential rate whilst having the wood to out farms under the Aachen in the background. You rarely even need to go onto your starting berries. In a lot of the cases, and your comparison to English is very good. I think like they really are English, but better in a way. In feudal age, especially, they can add farms easier, even though they're more expensive. They can mass units easier, even if they don't have council hall. Like English. So it's kind of radical to watch it unfold, really. And on top of it, they have a very strong fast castle, unlike English. They could even go 2TCs potentially, although that is becoming less and less common. Obviously, they have the classic relics into with Regnius into Imprush, which is also very strong if you practice it and get good at. So quite versatile, but most shining example of their strength would be that feudal play, like you mentioned, Voldemar, and so many civs struggle against it on ladder. They're good on pretty much on every single map in the pool right now. Actually, they are playable and they will do fine if you play them properly. And as you said yourself, quite forgiving. Not only is it easy for you to survive pushes because of bonuses like emergency repairs, as well as cheaper emplacements on your towers. The crazy eco behind it, allowing you to mass so many units, and then obviously Regnitz Cathedral and Castle with relics, but even Burgrave is an option if you're late there. Just a powerhouse civ, and S tier is definitely where they belong.
Absolutely. Now moving on to the tournament side of things, I believe that it's something similar. In fact, HRE again outshines a lot of civs on water, and many of the recent S tier and A tier tournaments, King of the North, Master of Realms, now Red Bull, include water maps, and for these water maps, HRE is almost permabanned in the draft because it just performs super well. I don't quite remember the stats for it, but I saw that for the qualifier for Red Bull, HRE was like super overperforming. It might have been like 70% win rate or something, 75% win rate. And it's just those numbers that just testify that this is one of those civs that just performs super well. Tournament play is different from ladder play in the sense that it's usually way more aggressive, it's more timing related, and HRE just does that super well. HRE just plays good on water, and it can just supersede a lot of the same strats that other civs try to employ. And many of the counter mechanics from some civilizations like Mongols, like Ottomans, that's just not even there when you're playing those matchups in tournaments. And you would, in a tournament setting, love to not have to play against HRE when you are picking civs like Mongols and Ottoman, because they serve a different purpose to counter something like gold heavy civs or knight civs. And that you can't do it because of the production and the prelate and just in general how effective they are.
Yeah, it's just incredibly powerful and good on every single map, right? For the longest time, they've been one of the premier picks on any full water map, even some hybrid maps. They're very good on land maps now, especially. They're better than ever before, right? With notably the built-in marching drills bonus that HRE now has. It's very, very powerful. I don't think anyone really expected the impact it would make, but it's been so huge.
Yeah.
On water maps, they shine so much with the Aachen Chapel because it gives you such a severe injection in terms of economic boost that quite often you can win water against most civilizations before the Aachen radius runs out, which is kind of the way you want to play it.
Yeah.
And then, even just the most standard maps like Dry Arabia, if you just have your wood under Aachen, you can just pump so many archers and so many spearmen, so many farms. So many civs just struggle to deal with it. And on some picks, on some maps in tournament play, they're the best, if not top 2 or 3 civs on that specific map. Notable examples is something like Frisian Marshes, of course. They are one of the best there, with the immense amount of sheep. But Holy Island as well, they're extremely good for similar reasons, which is water-heavy hybrid map. And S tier, without a doubt, in tournament play, perhaps even better than ladder.
Yeah, maybe even that is the case. The next civ is Abbasid. I think Abbasid is a difficult one to currently place on ladder, as it is not one of those civs that is played as much as many of the other civs. It's not typically one of those classic OP civs like Rus, Atri, English, like the Dark Triad, sort of Byzantines as well, of like picks on ladder. I think Abbasid can be reasonably placed in ladder play in B tier. Do you agree?
I do agree, actually. I was tempted to say low A tier, but high B tier, low A tier. As we get more civs going, it'll even out anyway. But I do agree with you. I think Abbasid has the same potential as a lot of these stronger civs, but I do believe they're slightly more difficult to pilot than a lot of the others. Their tendency and preference to go for 2TC on ladder as well as in tournaments, right, can leave them open to some pretty rough timing attacks if they don't either place the TC properly or follow through properly afterwards in terms of units or fast cost, whatever it may be. Now, you don't necessarily have to play multi-TC with Abbasid, at least initially. In some cases, you might want to, in fact, delay the TC depending on the matchup or map. They really are a very solid civilization, but they can be punished a bit more severely than some of these others because of those 2TC players, as well as, like, if you go 2TC against an aggressive civilization, even something like French that is very aggressive, though not inherently too strong, or English, of course, is quite a classic bad matchup. You can get punished very, very severely if you don't know what you're doing.
The meta play for Abbasid is the typical 2DC militarying play, and it's pretty good in general. It does counter civs like Mongols and forces civs like Malians as well to sort of get into these awkward situations. I think Abbasid is pretty good at defending, especially because they just have that good economy. But they're very, very different in tournament play, in my opinion, and they have served a way stronger purpose than they've done on ladder in tournaments, simply because of this sort of 1TC militarying dock style play, which means on Kavasan, Scandinavia, they play really, really well with this sort of Ayyubid dock drop timing that is incredibly strong, where you can also go into a ram push with your military units. But on maps like Frisian Marshes, they can also play trade. So they're quite unpredictable in the tournament scene and very, very predictable in the ladder play. And that's why I think that Abbasid could very well supersede the English, and I would probably put them in high A tier.
I agree completely. What you said is without a doubt true. It's definitely, we see a shift in Abbasid in tournament play, most notably on maps like Kawasan and Scandinavia, as you mentioned yourself. The ability to not only have cheaper, it's quite a perfect storm for them on these hybrid maps. Not only the cheaper docks, half price, of course, is huge for them early on. Obviously, not having to age up with villages works very well for them, because their economy will be in the strongest spot once they reach there. And yeah, we've seen this huge resurgence of military wing into RAM on maps like Kawasan, where it's so tough for the opponent to deal with the units of the military wing, as well as taking out the RAM whilst defending on water at the same time. And there's so many ways to play it. I mean, you go dock 2 fishing ships, or even skip the dock entirely. And that ram timing makes it so difficult for the opponent to hold their initial pond, especially if they're late on the age up. As you said yourself, on certain maps like Frisian, the trade can be very powerful depending on the enemy civilization. Without a doubt, A tier, just a very solid picks, playable on some of these more closed maps as well. They're very strong on Hill and Dale, which we see quite often in tournaments. Even a short distance map like Cliffside with some walls, they can be quite effective, though not the optimal pick. But mainly hybrid is where we see them be very, very oppressive.
Yeah, let's not waste time and jump to the next one. The next one is Mongol. I think personally that Mongol is in a tough spot on ladder right now. Serves as one of those civs that has seen massive play throughout the time, especially at the higher level in Conqueror and above. And it's really where we see like a civ that has been super strong with tower rushing and dark age rushing in general. And this strong trade build has also been on ladder for so long, but all of those things have been nerfed. And now with the recent nerf to the pastures as well, even though they got buffed with a 50 wood reduction on their TCs, I feel like Mongols just still is that shadow of its former self on ladder. I'm not going to get into tournaments just yet, but if I was to put them on the tier list right now, I think Mongols is down. I can't quite figure out if they're a B tier or a C tier civ. I think they're definitely above French, but I think they're below Abbasid.
Yeah, I think they're teetering on that low B, high C line as well, for sure, because of the points you've made. Like, we've got, due to the sheep changes, we've had a little buff to pastures production, but funnily enough, someone on Reddit did the maths and it works out as an overall nerf for Mongols in terms of food. So that, I mean, it's going to hurt them a little bit, but they have bigger problems than that, of course. For the longest time, the issue with Mongols is that on maps where they're strong, they're top 1, top 2, top 3, without a doubt. Whereas on maps where they're not good, they fall flat and become one of the very worst civilizations. And essentially just comes down to trade, right? In a standard scenario, they're quite good at being aggressive without trade. The double production from the Uvu allows you to get off many units early, and that's very helpful for them. But then, as you get into extended feudal against some other, feudal favored civilizations, something like English or French, if you just play against them in feudal without having something behind it, like 1TC against 1TC, you just fall further behind by the minute, it feels like, right? Like, the stone can only do so much for you. You don't have walls at all, which can really hurt you when you start going out to the pocket food, which if you play feudal against feudal, you have to, right? I mean, the 50% cost reduction on the TC is something, but like multi-TC plays something they're bad at anyway. Most of the civs in the game actually outscale them, I would say, until you get to like post imp, when you have like a ludicrous trade line set up, but games very rarely get there. So I'd say, yeah, below Abbasid, above French for now is definitely correct. There's some good maps on the ladder right now. Canal, they're one of the best at for sure. Obviously, Rocky River, they're very strong at due to the trade post. The Pit, they're strong. Essentially, any trade map, they're a good civ there, or potentially hybrid map. Whereas on normal land maps, they're one of the weaker picks for sure.
Yeah, and it is very matchup dependent, as we talked about. This civ does super well against civs early on, like Malians, as they're just able to perform super well with their bounty bonus against these houses around the pit mines and stuff, and can become very oppressive in certain matchups, whereas in other matchups it sucks to play them. So if you're playing against Malians, if you're playing against, I would say like Ottomans is okay. Byzantines is one of the few good matchups, or relatively good matchups, and I would say that Mongols just perform really well there, but not well against civs like Rus and English, or Ayyubids for that matter. And so it's a civ that, if drafted correctly, and if you manage to snipe those civs that are just so, bad against them, you can really use this civ with high utility, because it is so bad to play against Mongols if you're Malians and so on. So therefore, I would probably put them either high B or low A tier in the tournament setting, simply because their role in the draft, and due to the nature of how oppressive they are just one of those civs that if you have the civs that aren't good against them, you're scared that the Mongol pick will come out, and you're just always trying to figure out, when is this getting picked?
Low A to high B, without a doubt as well. I completely agree with your point about them being this almost like a sniper civilization, where on some maps you can get some really favorable matchups for Mongols, even on maps you potentially wouldn't expect. Like we've seen them being quite popular on a map like Socotra, which, even though there's no trade, due to the low distance, that early pump with the stone units can be very effective against a lot of civilizations. they're definitely a sort of hostage taker civilization where you can really hold the draft close to your chest in some regards with the threat of a Mongol pick on some maps.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, on maps like Frisian Marshes, which is quite popular in most tournaments, they're one of the very best due to trades. Like if you have a trade map and you have Mongols in your draft, then you're very happy because reality is few civs will actually beat them hard on that kind of a map. Even their rougher matchups, like Rus, for example, potentially Abbasid, they have a much easier time dealing with if they can trade. They don't mind it as much as on a normal map. So, yeah, without a doubt, it's a pretty strong, solid pick overall in tournament play.
The next civ we're going to take a look at is the Chinese. And the Chinese currently on ladder don't really perform the same way as they do in tournaments. The Chinese is notoriously like a boomy civilization, and whilst they're good against a bunch of civs, in ladder play, they're typically strong on water maps, they're typically strong on closed maps, and if they can drag the game on, that's when they're pretty good. But they also kind of struggle against quite a lot of civs. I would say like it's not necessarily easy to play meta Chinese against civs like Atri, English, Abbasid. But if you can drag the game on and get to the late game, then you're usually fine. I'm going to ask you this time, where would you place Chinese?
On ladder play, if properly utilized, I would place China either high B tier or low A tier.
Low A tier or high B tier?
Yeah, probably A this time around. I do think they're better on ladder than Abbasid, actually. And there's a few reasons for that. In terms of bonuses, I think they're a little bit more complex than Abbasid. They're very similar in a lot of ways, but also dissimilar in some other ways. The main drawback of China on ladder play in general, but even in tournaments somewhat, is the food access, right?
Yeah.
Even if you stay on 1 TC as opposed to 2 TC, if you have Song, you're going to end up being quite food starved, quite similar to French. And securing extra food can be quite difficult with China. Now, what makes it easier at the start of the game, that allows you to get off to a good start at least, is the Barbican, of course. Makes it pretty much impossible for your opponents to dive initially if you have it in a good spot. And it's absolutely true that I still believe they're actually the number one late game civilization with equal resources access. So as long as you scale comfortably and safely, was not losing too much map control, I think you're going to be in a very good spot. Like China's a very safe civilization where I don't think you have to take too many aggressive risks with them because of the safe scaling and your eco prowess behind it. So as long as you just play very methodical on ladder, I would say, and secure the map bit by bit, I think you're going to have a good time with China for sure, as long as you understand, how to make best use of the officials as well as the Imperial Academy, of course. You want to maximize your taxes and your boosted income with the officials without a doubt to get the most out of the civ, because ignoring these will makes China kind of a shell of itself, I would say.
In tournament play, however, I feel like they kind of occupy a very water-heavy position, where they're typically picked in place of civs like Shuji and Rus for Holy Island, for water maps that are usually more focused on deep sea fish and larger water play. And whereas we have different civs like Japanese and Mongols that are typically stronger in these more narrow water maps like Kaosan, like Canal, Chinese are better on the larger ones, and I feel like Chinese, because of that, can be put maybe behind Mongols, maybe in high B. I'm not quite sure, because I feel like I would be happier to have a Chinese pick in a tournament, but the role that Mongol can play in a draft is sometimes greater than the Chinese one. But just based off of how they in general perform, I might want to put Chinese before or after Chinese. Sorry, English. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so as well. That's exactly the spot I was thinking of, actually. They, as you said yourself, they kind of, before the new civilizations came out, China was part of the triumvirate of top water maps, right?
Mm.
Along with Rus and HRE most notably. In some ways better than them, in some ways worse, right? These three were always the number one water civs for the longest time now. And, you know, obviously that hasn't really changed with the new civs. There's more thrown into the mix. Like she is very notable, as well as Japanese being very strong on water as well. But China's been up there for a long time, and it's will always be a very good for water pick. I see it less prioritized, like you said, on land maps as much. Part of it is the risk associated with them, right? They can be vulnerable to being denied resources early because they typically run a slow composition in most of their games. Oh, you want to rely quite a lot on siege as China from the clock tower, which also reduces your mobility. So you can be susceptible for your forces to be split in unfavorable ways and struggle to take map control sometimes. So on open maps especially, we don't see them very often in tournaments at all. They're versatile, without a doubt, one of the strongest water picks, like we said. A tier is a very suitable spot for them, I would say. You would rather have a China than a Mongol in your draft for sure in most cases, and probably over English as well, I would say, depending on the maps. But typically they're just stronger than English, I would say. Whereas Abbasid, in terms of comparison to Abbasid, I would say Abbasid is generally like slightly safer than China in tournament play. Not nearly as good on full water, of course, but they compensate on hybrid maps. Whereas on general land maps, I think they're kind of even, actually. If we're talking about an open map, like they both have some things in terms of edge over the others, like Barbican and Zuganus make China strong defensively, whereas Abbasid has slightly better eco early with access to berries as well, the golden age, but they're very even on regular land maps, I would say. So 80 is fitting.
The next civ is Rus. Rus is notoriously one of those civs that most people would probably regard as OP. And that's simply due to the fact that they have so much going for them while still being a defensive civ. They have knights. They have the bounty system providing a very, very notable tempo boost early on that allows for many different strats. So for example, with a good amount of bounty, let's say you have 250 or 300 bounty, you're able to push out a couple of knights, get second TC, all in like 6 minutes and 30 seconds. And that's just one of those civs that are also super good against a lot of other civs, like Mongols, like Abbasid, we can go on. I think it performs well against a lot of civs, but there are a few notable matchups where it's a little bit tougher. I think it's one of those civs, like French, that struggle against Malians and Ottomans, and that just for that reason, it can sort of force a certain playstyle from them, and it's usually not as effective as the general playstyle. If I was to put them on the ladder, I would still put them very, very high because they perform really well. They have a very safe economy. They're just in general a good civ if you want to take it far, because you can play so many strats with them, whether it's fast castle, 2DC, aggression. What do you think?
ST is for sure correct. For the longest time, Rus are essentially the kings of versatility, right? They truly can go virtually any strategy, are very solid at every age in the game. Feudal, castle, imp, they're very strong there. So many bonuses, like you said, not having to mine any gold in the Dark Age is huge, as long as you practice and get somewhat good at the scout game, of course. Kremlin will keep you very nice and safe, cozy in your base. That's what allows them to go 2TC against pretty much every civilization if they want on ladder and get away with it, right? Of course, they don't have to. They can just play aggression on 1TC if they like, where you have the ability to flex from Kremlin to Golden Gate for that kind of a play potentially, which I would argue might be superior. Even in Castle, both their landmarks are solid. Typically, you want to go high Trade House, but if you want to play Warrior Monks, you can go the Abbey of Trinity landmark for the extra technologies. Really is just this very solid civilization, and it will serve you very, very, very well on ladder, I would say. There's very, very few maps where it's actually not a good pick. Notably, Canal is probably the only one in the pool right now. Every other map in the pool, they will undoubtedly do just fine, if not great, against most of the civs in the game.
I would probably pin them to a similar spot in the tournament side of things. right here. And the reason I'm doing that is because it has a similar role to what we spoke about before with Mongols, as being one of those civs that are very, very oppressive. And if you are to go up against it, a lot of your civs that have been picked as sort of counter picks, so for the purpose of maybe sniping, if you manage to use that civ in sort of a defensive pick against like snipe, where you might think, okay, he's gonna probably expect me to go Malians here or a fast castle civ, and he's gonna pick Mongols. I could pick Rus here and still be fine because Rus will do well on pretty much any map. And so it doesn't really matter where I pick it in map wise. But if I see a bad matchup coming up, I can try to avoid that and just play Rus as my throwaway card because I know it'll be fine no matter what.
I think I forgot to mention is on water maps, Rus is arguably the most oppressive pick. A lot of people may be familiar with. I mean, it's called a cheese, but it's not really. It's essentially the best way to go with a Rus on water, where if you get at least only 10 day, you're able to age up without mining any gold.
Yep.
And obviously, because you have the conversion mechanic on a lot of your fishing ships, you can hit a 4-minute age up with Rus whilst having 2 fishing boats and convert them instantly to galley and a springboard ship if you mine just a little bit more gold. And then, you can severely punish your opponent's fishing if they're late on the age up, force them to idle, and on the back of that, you can just make even more fishing ships or keep mounting the pressure. Even Kremlins can be very oppressive on a water map. Just sending them to suicide in the opponent's base can be a very effective strategy. Idling out the economy is huge. And like you said yourself, Voldemar on land, they're just so solid against potential picks on some maps where you might be countered with some civ. Typically, Rus is your safe bet on those maps where, okay, well, if I pick the best civ here, I might get countered, but Rus will do just great as well, right? And they'll be safe. The only real situations in which Rus can struggle is there are a couple civs in the game, notably Abbasid, China, and English, that can potentially, or maybe Byzantines as well. Perhaps OTD and HR as well with relics where they can get outboomed, and they might lose in late game. But most often, Rus economy is so strong in feudal age and castle age that if you are good at consolidating map control and securing your base, you can typically secure more resources for yourself than the opponent's booming civilization and be in a favorable spot in the late game anyway.
I agree with you on pretty much everything you said, but I do think that the water meta has changed a bit and that the galley opener isn't as strong as we have seen it before. So Holy Island is one of those maps that have been super, super strong for these more eco style plays, but it's really, really difficult to actually attack on it because the moment you have a ship over to their base, they've made 2 ships. And when they push with their 2 ships to your base, you have 4 ships. And it just keeps going back and forth like that. So on those maps where it's already hard to push, that sort of style doesn't really work anymore. And it's why civs like Shuji or Chinese probably can perform just as well on those maps. Just in general, maps where water is much more tight, you will see that this style is incredibly dangerous. So I agree with you, but I also think that in general people play water less greedy now. People don't open up with 11, 12 fishing ships anymore. They open up with a max of maybe 4 to 8.
Yeah, so big of it is map dependency for sure. Like Holy Island is very common in tournaments now, and you're completely correct that due to the longer distance, the galley can lose some impact, especially against a civ like Jushi that only has a cheaper age up, but just like China can age up faster. Baltic, I think they might be a little bit better than Holy Island for that type of Rus play, but not by much. But you are completely right. They are slightly outshined the longer the game goes on by something like China and Jushi, because they can really offset the early galley due to the faster rage up, right, that they have access to innately. So
the next civ is Delhi. I think for ladder play, Delhi is just in general one of those civs that are very one-dimensional, and we've spoken about this concept before, but they're just so oppressive to play against because they don't have a lot of bad matchups, and they force people to play in a certain way, and they have a really strong timing. But if you miss that, and you can't play that properly because maybe you have some issues as a player, like your macro is not the best, or your micro is not the best, or you just in general your understanding of Delhi is not the best. Delhi can be pretty difficult to play. So Delhi itself, as a climbing civ, is probably pretty good if you want to learn aggression. Is it a flexible civ? Hell no. That's not the case. I would say Delhi goes really well at the bottom of A tier, maybe before Chinese, maybe even before English, just because it can perform super well on natural open maps. But because it's sort of awkward to play on these more closed maps or maps where you find water, I feel like they get outshined as well. I will put them in A tier, but I'm not sure if they're better or worse. So I'm gonna put them maybe in between here, and then say, okay, whilst they are better than English and maybe struggle a little bit against Chinese, this will be in no particular order.
I would argue they're a stronger civilization overall than English on a lot of maps on ladder,
Mm-hmm.
but English is so much easier to pilot, right?
Yeah.
And that's quite an important concept for a lot of players on ladder, right? Like the easiest civ to play, which English has been notorious for that for the longest time now,
Yeah.
can be more favorable than something like Delhi potentially. Now
Mm-hmm.
Delhi is simple somewhat in essence, like you said, Voldemar, and they're quite one-dimensional. Typically, you will always be hardcore feudal play the vast majority of your games. But in terms of how you play it, not only regarding timings, but also macro behind it, obviously not wanting to mine any gold, being relying on sacred sites, and then choosing wisely how you spend that gold, whether it's at the market or more scholars or potentially aging up. It can get somewhat complex
Mm-hmm.
at that kind of point, but without a doubt, an incredibly powerful feudal civilization, one of the very best in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Super oppressive, like you said, very, very tough to hold against an all-in from Delhi if you don't prepare adequately. They're one of the best civs at punishing fast castles due to the amount of units they can pump out. Obviously, Ghazi's having access to +2 damage against armored units is nice. 20% attack speed from Tower of Victory is huge, as well as obviously the attack speed extends to spears if you face knights. The economy can be very powerful because of free upgrades, although they take longer naturally. But getting gold for free from sacred sites is huge.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very punishing civ if you take one bad fight against them in feudal. Typically, the game will be next to impossible from then on.
Delhi in the tournament setting, I think, serve a similar purpose. But the cool thing about playing Delhi in tournaments is, whilst it's quite predictable where you're gonna pick it, it will still outperform most civs. It's one of those civs that we can typically open the draft with and not really show our cards with, simply because it's predictable. And it's going to do well against most civs that will then be picked for these open maps. So if you played on Dry Arabia and you played into Mongols, if you played into English, if you played into French, you feel comfortable. And that's just like the main reason that I would probably put them at the very top of the A tier in the draft scene, because it's so good just to get started with it. But it's not like it's the first civ pick. A really good Delhi player can secure an easy win, but if you are not the best at Delhi, it immediately falls down because you have to be very comfortable with what you're doing, and it might be better for you to play something different. But playing against it, again, it's a struggle. Do you think that it would be valid to put it up here together with the top civs just because of its role on the land maps? Or do you think that because it's not as versatile, that it's to serve that argument, it would probably go down or to the back of the A tier list?
I would say more towards the back of A tier, perhaps higher than Mongols, really. Maybe even English potentially, but I think
Mm.
Abbasid and China are, I would say, a little bit superior. But I think you made some very great points there. Notably, Delhi will not be a priority pick in a draft because they are just stronger civs, right?
Mm-hmm.
But they are a fantastic opener civ
Yeah.
for a lot of maps, right? Delhi is quite unique in this regard that people will know exactly what you're going to go for with Delhi every game
Mm-hmm.
because that is essentially what you do with Delhi every single game. But despite that, it's still so powerful.
Yep.
Unlike something like French, right? Because typically with French, you're also going to go the same thing every game, but it doesn't even compare to Delhi, right?
Yeah.
In terms of just power. in raw numbers of units and economy. What could be interesting to see in the coming weeks, especially for in Red Bull this weekend, is obviously Delhi has received some pretty interesting changes on water, notably. And we have seen quite a few players prioritize it in practice for maps like Kawasan, as well as even Holy Island. We've seen it a few times in practice games. So I'm curious to see how Delhi develops there, because I think they have potential to be one of the stronger water civs. But we'll just have to wait and see. But for now, it's just a very, very solid, one of the best feudal civs in the game.
The next civ is Byzantines. Byzantines are a little bit of a topic of controversy, because I think a lot of people on the ladder are very tired of playing against them, myself included.
Oh yeah,
because again, they do the same thing and they're just good at it, and there's not a lot you can do because they have been fitted with so much utility. I would easily put them in S tier, and I would probably put them just behind HRE, for the simple reason that HRE is one of the only civs that actually can do super well against Byzantines with the feudal all-in. But I might actually also put them behind Rus, because Rus is also pretty good against Byzantines. What do you think?
I completely agree, actually, with the S tier placement. The thing with Byzantines is, they remind me quite a bit of Malians after the very first cow buffs. They would just sit in their base with a very
Yeah, that's
powerful
true.
defense. They would just sit in their base with a very powerful defense that you have to crack, and you're on a timer essentially. If you do not crack it, well, for Malians it's cows, for Byzantines it's farms around the Grand Winery, right?
Yeah.
Donzo Jav, and typically with Biz it'll be either Jav Limitane or Longbow Limitane, right? You'll see most commonly. If you just don't do enough damage to them before they reach castle, they're gonna explode in economy so drastically, just right after aging up, that they can essentially just run over with the game from then on. I think the 10 wood nerf on the farm, although it seems very insignificant, I I think it's a good start, because across hundreds of games we're gonna see like a slight shift downwards in terms of win rate for the save. Like 10 wood is still nothing. Even before, I think sometimes they struggle to hold with just their starting berries if they don't play effectively and if the enemy player punishes well. Now they will struggle against that even more. Yeah, I mean, just super oppressive on land maps, and if you have a good spawn with back berries or back gold, then you're in the money. If even one of them's at the back, you're usually very, very happy, especially if the winery is there and your berries. But they're not quite as versatile as Rus, for example. Rus can be played on water maps very effectively as well, whereas Byzantine essentially has no place on water maps, right? The numbers just don't work very well with Rus with Byzantine, sorry, on ladder. So I would highly advise against playing them on any kind of water hybrid map.
Yeah.
And then HRE, of course, HRE, just out equals them quite hard early on. And HRE can hit quite a brutal all-in timing on Biz, where if the Biz, has a slightly unfavorable spawn, and or they they slack on the defense and they greed for the castle timing earlier, they will just lose the game, essentially. The other top civs are like the only ones that can really hold a candle to Byzantines, whereas other civs can be quite tough. Obviously, Mongols is a notable exception because of their timings, but yeah,
absolutely.
ladder play without a doubt S tier. Yeah,
I think when we talk about tournaments and Byzantines, they kind of serve the similar purpose as the Delhi Sultanate does, whereas it's quite predictable where you will pick them. It's going to be typically a open map or a map with a lot of berries, like Lipany. It's going to be a map where they can then sit in a long feudal play, and that will feel comfortable. If they have to go for the castle age play, that's absolutely fine for them as well. And I think that Byzantines, just for that reason in the draft, they are just good. There's not much to say. They just perform really well against anything on these land maps. They struggle a little bit against civs like Delhi and Mongols, but if they have that good spawn, it's usually okay for them. I don't fully understand why people are so adamant on banning Byzantines if there are a lot of water maps because then you would like to have other civs than Byzantines early. But if you're playing a draft that has only land maps, it's going to be one of those civs that are just up here with Rus and H3. And to my previous point, whereas there are a lot of water maps, it probably goes down to like behind Chinese or something. Do you agree?
Yeah, I would agree. It's a very stark contrast with Byzantines. There's few other cities like this where they're one of the most oppressive and powerful on land, whereas on water they're actually one of by far the worst, right?
Yeah.
Part of it is the obviously the Dromon, which they have access to instead of the Springald ship. It has received some changes, but it's a short range fire ship essentially, which I mean, you know, in terms of kiting on water, it just doesn't work very well. It's just a weak ship, is the reality. I think that's actually the main part why Biz is weak on water. Part of it is also the olive oil, the food and olive oil income with fish is a bit is the numbers don't match very well at all, and you'll either be floating olive oil or you'll be floating food. They're landmarks for feudal age, when feudal age is very important on water maps. They're quite bad. The winery, you're not going to be gathering berries because you're on water, and having some horsemen is nice, but it's not really a boost. Without a doubt, one of the strongest civs in the game.
Yeah, 100% agree. So yeah, for ladder play, they perform well. Tournament play, they play a different role depending on the draft, so it's hard to place them. Next civ I want to talk about is Japanese. Japanese is a funky one because in tournament play and ladder play, they perform like polar opposites. They are very, very weak in the feudal age, but if you play them and you're really good at them, you can usually find some maps where it's great to play them. But when you're forced to play against civs like the Delhi, like Ayyubids, even something like Jeanne D'arc can actually do pretty well against them. Against these civs, it just falls off really, really early. But the power spike that they have in the Castle Age just outshines that so much. So if you can get to the Castle Age, they're really good. I think a lot of people want to also play Japanese and they want to be really good with them. I see a lot of people in general try to improve with Japanese, but they're just not that civ that you want to be using for that purpose. It's a civ that is really good on water maps and is really good for the castle timing. But if you're going to get good at the game and you want to climb with it, I don't think Japanese is the way. I'm actually inclined to say that in terms of playing ladder, Japanese, because of the fact that they're not that strong in feudal, I would put them right here in C tier.
Yeah, I would agree for sure. I think ladder especially, there can be a lot of value in playing feudal with a lot of civilizations. Because being aggressive and trying to set tempo early in ladder games is a great way to not only learn the game but also climb at the same time. Because if you are the tempo setter, if you are the one who is the one being aggressive, forcing your opponent to split his army, to split his villages, idle him out, right? You can constantly gain small leads this way that can snowball throughout the course of the game. And like you said yourself, Voldemar, the fact that Japanese is arguably the weakest civ in the game in feudal age means that it's quite hard to do that with them. Now, they got a little buff on the Yumi, 5% extra health, which after testing is not too bad, to be honest. It's okay. But like, the issue is, like, if you are playing feudal Japanese, you will always be on the defensive against any civ in the game, essentially. A big thing is sheep, right? If you get a good sheep haul, use your starting berries from the Dark Age, are effective at dealing with an all-in potentially, which can be difficult. Once you get to that Castle Age, it's quite a very severe and sharp power spike for them. And if you get some damage done with Mounted Samurai or Onabugeshis or regular Samurai, then you can find yourself in a pretty powerful position to play the game from then on, for sure.
In a stark contrast to the latter tier list, I would actually probably, as one of the only civs, put this civ all the way up in the back of S tier, because the role that it plays in the recent tournaments that we've had, we've seen Lucifron, we've seen Vortex play this civ to such a tremendous ability and really just utilizing its full potential on water that is outshining civs like Abbasid or Mongols on these very like closed hybrid maps. The problem for them is they don't really work super well on the larger maps, but they can work on Holy Island. It's not as good as something like Rus or Chinese or Jiuji. But if you take a map like Baltic, they don't work at all. If you take a map like Kazakhstan, like Canal or Scandinavia, they're incredibly powerful. So I'm not quite sure. I'm hesitant to put them in S tier, but I wouldn't mind them sitting there. Maybe they should be at the top of A tier.
I think so as well. Now A tier is getting a little bit crowded, so it's tough to place them there. But I think that is where they belong in reality, for a lot of the reasons you mentioned. It essentially comes down to, in tournament play, the Japanese is one of your premier hybrid picks, right? Yeah. They absolutely excel, and I would say are the best in the game. Any kind of hybrid map where there is some level of interaction between land and the water itself.
Mm-hmm.
The most prominent example of that is, of course, Kawasan right now. That is in Red Bull as well. I think Japanese is number one there and has been for quite a while, closely followed by Abbasid, I would say.
100%.
Like, even with the military units, 2 archers can deal with the shinobi, as well as 2 spearmen to help tank. But, like, it can even be worth it just to sacrifice your shinobi for a sabotage. You just win the pond, and then those units become useless, essentially, right? They're very mobile, the shinobis, not only with the shunshin, but also in terms of they're quite quick as well. They can catch up to villagers running away that are building ponds. If your opponent is not effectively fast enough to either cancel a pond, you can make them completely waste the wood for it if you quickly demolish a dock that's about to be built. There's quite a high skill cap, I think, for Japanese on these hybrid maps, and they can be tough to turn into number one. But if you have the potential and know how to do so, yeah, they are almost uncontestable on the map like Kawa.
Next civilization is Order of the Dragon. And Order of the Dragon, I want to just preface this by saying that if you're playing on ladder, you will find that you can pick any civ and climb with it. Whether you're picking French, whether you're picking HRE, you will pick a civ, and it's not going to be the civ that determines whether you can climb or not, it's you. But the reason I'm prefacing this is because I really actually want to put Order of the Dragon in D tier, but you can still play the civ. Order of the Dragon occupies a weaker spot than other civs, and if you compare them to Rus, Biz, HRE, it's pretty much impossible to play them at the high level. Whereas at a more general level, Order of the Dragon, if executed well and if played aggressively or with a nice castle timing, can perform actually pretty strong. They're actually all right against civs like Rus in the long game, just like you've said before. And I think that is also where their strength is, that a lot of these strong civs, like Rus, maybe Chinese, I'm not sure, they actually not necessarily do super well.
Yeah, just leading on your preface, I do agree with D tier. It's very important to highlight, just like Voldemar said, that it is completely possible to get even Conqueror 3, I would say, playing one single civilization on every single map, even the bad ones for them, with enough patience and enough adaptability. Of course, we don't want this tier list to desensitize people from, oh, well, OTD is so bad, I don't want to play them. You can get Conk 3 with playing purely OTD. That's 100% true without a doubt. Now, what the tier list is for is that it will determine the ease of you getting there, right? Yeah. It will be much more difficult. Like, you will have to play better than your opponent in most games with OTD, notably better to actually win the game, whereas with another civ, just playing just as well might be enough to win, right? And this is an important point to make. But you're completely right, Voldemar. OTD just seems to lack in almost every area. I think the strongest age, like you said yourself, I think is late game. But the tough part is getting there, right? Yeah. The thing is, they're a variant of HRE, right? So naturally, most people will draw comparisons to HRE. And that's where the reality comes in. That HRE is honestly superior in every single way, except for maybe late game ranged units. Yeah. And that's kind of the only situation. But like, it's such a niche, comp and situation to be in that, if you're weaker than HRE every stage until then, it's tough. I mean, the Aachen is weaker. Their overall economy is weaker. Their units are weaker. Of course, it's double pop and double cost, double stats. That's true. But numbers wise, they still end up weaker than equal cost for the opponent. They I think they really struggle against raiding because splitting off their army effectively can be even tougher than with other civilizations due to the numbers game. If you do get to Imperial Age and you start getting a significant ranged mass of, be it crossbows, hand cannoniers, archers, a mix of them, right? They can be very, very, very powerful for sure, and can hold a candle to a lot of these other scaling civilizations. The issue is surviving to that point.
Yes. I think Order of the Dragon, when it comes to just learning the game as well, is one of those civs that aren't ideal for it, just like we talked about before. Whereas there's some civs that you don't really have that flexibility, like Delhi, for example. I think Order of the Dragon introduces a very unique problem, which is if your first civ is Order of the Dragon, you're learning the game very differently because all the values are different. The civs units perform differently, and in general, how you should play them might also differ from the flexibility you would have playing other civs. And so it is a civ that can teach you, I think, some things that make it difficult to get into other civs. Whereas if you were to start with the original civ, not the variant, so HRE, you would be able to do all of those things and then get easily into another civ. When it comes to the tournament side of things, I think they occupy a spot similar to French. Maybe before, maybe behind. What will you say?
I would actually say OTD is better than French in tournaments, purely because of the existence of water maps.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So we've seen, especially in the last tournament just before Red Bull, or Master of Realms, of course. We've seen OTD become quite a popular pick on Archipelago, most notably. Now, it's worth noting that they're not one of the top civilizations on water. The reason we did see that, and we might continue to see it in some games, of course, it's the Aachen, right? Like, the Aachen boost, although weaker than HREs, even considering obviously the gap in terms of villager gather rates and stats. I mean, if you convert the OTD Aachen to HRE, it would work out to something like 35% compared to the 40% of HRE. So they're not quite at that point, but it is worth noting that they actually are better later in water than HRE, because it doesn't hurt them as much when the Aachen runs out because the villages are better, right?
It's a really good point that you make there, because I didn't actually consider the water side of things. And that is the argument that I've been using for many of these civs here.
Yeah.
Do you think that it's a B tier civ then?
It could potentially be, actually, because, when you look at the top water civs, be it HRE, Rus, Japanese, Chinese, Jushi, of course, maybe even, rare cases, English, Mongols, potentially, depending on them. They're definitely a tier below them, but they would be, in terms of secondary water civs, they are one of the best for sure. There's even a lot of value in one single men at arm early in feudal age on water for them. It can cause an immense amount of idle time. Sure, it's expensive, but that could potentially be enough with the Aachen boost for you to really gain a lead on water and maybe even win it potentially. But other than that, they just fall flat on every other land map. And
the next civ is Ayyubids. And Ayyubids is a very, very popular civ, and credits due. It's performing very well, as it's one of those civs that, similar to Japanese wants to go fast castle a lot, they have this ability to do that without being raided as much, because they're doing the raiding with the military wings desert raiders. So it's a civ that, in general, performs well with the meta play style. Where would you place this civ currently?
I think they're a solid A tier for the lander, without a doubt. Either high A tier or like slightly mid. Despite their double nerf to their most preferred playstyle in terms of course, military wing reinforcement to feudal age into growth wing and castle age. Now you get one less villager in castle age, and your desert raid is delayed, which will slow them down a bit. But the reality is that they're still going to be the same oppressive civilization that is going to get a very reasonable castle timing, whilst at the same time getting a sudden injection of villages to help their economy either catch up or scale a bit further on top of their tech advantage, right? Which is very notable. The classic timing attack with archers boosted by upgrades such as Sultan's Mamluks, as well as a Manjanique, which is very effective at dealing with farms, for example. If your opponent is making them, can make them very, very oppressive in Castle Age for sure. And they're a great civ for climbing on the ladder, without a doubt. They have very, very, very few bad maps. In fact, I don't even think they have any that they're actually just bad on. Even on water, they can be quite a strong cheese pick, I would say. You know, the fast age up into early ship can be very effective. Even proxies, we've seen that come up quite often and do some damage in tournament games, as well as on ladder. It's also a very strong option. Yeah, just a solid fast castle civ. Can be vulnerable to an all-in depending on spawn, and if you don't play it properly. Feudal is the weakest age for sure.
Yeah.
But you know, if you just play Ayyubids and just go fast castle, you'll have a good time in most of your games.
Similarly to civs like Japanese, I feel like they perform very well in the tournament scene, but for a different reason. When you play in a tournament, typically the play styles that you have to adopt are very different. And I've seen players like Kiljardi and Vortex adopt these very, very like timing dependent strategies with this civ. So when we talk about Ayyubids, it's not necessarily just a straight fast castle civ. That's rarely the case that you can even do that in a tournament. Now it's a civ where you might make 4 or 5 horsemen, 10 archers, or 20 archers, do some damage, force a reaction, and then you hit them with the advancement wing or the whatever you want to do with them, which is probably what they were originally designed for. You know, we've seen Bazaar be really strong, and then this military wing into villagers. And now I feel like in tournaments we see Ayyubids not played like that, but played with this feudal period during the game first that leads to a very strong timing that takes out so many civs that have now leaned into a more feudal style play. If I were to put them in a tier, it would still be A tier, but simply because of the strength that they have to do this on land maps, maybe somewhere before or after Chinese. What do you think?
That would be a good spot for them for sure, either before or after Chinese. I agree completely. We highlighted about timings is a very good point for sure. This is essentially Ayyubid is the timing civ in the game. No other civ has such sharp timings and such powerful timings as they do. I would argue in terms of different points in the game where you can essentially just win it with a well executed push, right? I think in tournament plays nowadays, especially, you will very rarely see naked fast castle from Ayyubids anymore. We're seeing, due to the buff in terms of Atabeg's amount, we'll see the Atabeg wing coming out with some regularity, both in feudal and castle age, combined with potentially growth or military wing reinforcement, either one of the two at different stages. Quite a lot of combinations you can make with the Ayyubid wings, which can be quite strong and flexible. A big notable aspect is obviously Golden Age Tier 2 for Ayyubids, giving them plus 100%, I think, is it right? Research speed. And it clearly, yeah, I think it's either 50 or 100. Abbasid has the 50, I believe. But either way, it's quite a notable research speed bonus. And, just like you said, Voldemar, this seems to be the design that the devs had in mind, where with the culturing advancement potentially, or even Desert Raiders maybe, or Atabegs on your castle age, you can combine that with upgrading some units that you had from feudal age quicker than other civilizations, the ability to build a Manjanique in the field, getting Mamluks, Sultan's Mamluks, which is a very powerful upgrade for this kind of a timing attack, can mean that you end games before your opponent even realizes that they ended in tournament play, especially, is quite common. And they're quite versatile as well, really, in terms of maps. I would say they shine most notably on open maps due to their tendency to play cavalry, at least initially. And they can be played on water maps, sort of like a second tier pick, kind of like OTD, maybe even a bit of a cheese pick, right, in terms of proxying or some ship timings. But they can really be played anyway. So just a solid civilization to have for sure.
100%. It's one of those civs that get picked quite early on in the draft, and it's also one of those civs that get memed on if you lose. You have to win with it. It's that strong.
Yeah, exactly.
The next civ is Malians. Malians is a little bit of a funny one to me because I feel like on ladder play they struggle for a lot. A lot of people struggle with them because people in general play very aggressive with them against them early. Whereas people are very locked in on this. I want a cow boom. I want a cow boom. I want a cow boom. A good Malian player can go really, really far, but I see a lot of bad Malian players as well.
Yeah.
I think fundamentally the Civ, once it gets to the power spike, that Castle Age timing, it's like no way back for your opponent. They just have to deal with this massive amount of food that they get, which can lead to this pump of units. But before that, they also struggle. And so I'm inclined to put this Civ high C tier. What do you think?
I would personally put them high B tier for
High B
ladder.
tier.
Yeah, high B tier actually, and I can explain the reasoning behind it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Marlins, as you said yourself, it's an interesting one because a lot of players have misconceptions about Malians where, they don't quite understand the timings of how to correlate when they start cow booming with when they make units
Mm-hmm.
and when they make their second pit mine and where in ladder games. A lot of players struggle with this, and part of it comes with experience and understanding, right? And I think that can really drag Malians down in a lot of games. Like people will overboom on cows and they not have enough units to defend, or they will underboom, make too many units, and then just get outscaled by 2TC, and the castle timing just doesn't hit
Mm.
quite as well as it should. And it really is a difficult balance to strike in terms of how well you play feudal in combination with how you boom with cows behind it to find good, comfortable castle timing.
Mm.
And this can be difficult for players to face, but I think with a bit of practice, you can find this balance, and then Malian becomes one of the greatest climbing civs, I would say.
Okay. And for the tournament side of things, they occupy a similar spot in my mind where they struggle a lot against these sniper civs like Delhi, Malians, Abbasid, HRE, Byzantines. Just do so well against this civ that I'm inclined to do something similar to them here and put them in B tier around this Order of the Dragon pick. Maybe I would say they're a little bit better overall than Order of the Dragon, worse on water. Though we kind of don't know yet with the new changes. I feel like Order of the Dragon might be a little bit better on water. But overall, performance-wise, maybe Malians is a high B tier pick. I'm not sure.
I do agree with you. I think it would hover around high B, maybe potentially low A, but yeah, just a solid. But I do think they're better than OTD for sure. I think B would be fine for them, but it's up to you. Malians, like you said, very good general all-around solid pick. A lot of open land maps.
Yep.
They've received an interesting change on water. We're now 10% of any food you drop off as a fishing ship is dropped off as gold instead, which can result in some interesting dynamics for aging up earlier with Malians. Obviously, there's the somewhat notorious transport ship Donzo Cheese to keep in mind with Malians on water, which we haven't seen in a long time, but I think can actually be really powerful on some maps and if executed well. So we'll just have to see how that progresses at the current tournament, Red Bull Wall especially.
Typically, the opening map, and this is not like a rule, but I've experienced it to be a lot of the time something like Coastal Cliffs, Dry Arabia, something similar to that. And the civs that perform well there are Mongols and Delhi, and they usually perform well into a lot of different civs in those maps.
It can get complex for sure, right? Like I think Mambarian is also one of those civs that some high-level players have quite a few disagreements about.
Yeah.
In terms of how strong they are. So this depends so much on the draft, right? Like I definitely don't think they're as good of an opener pick as something like Mongols or Delhi on some of these more open maps, like you said, Coastal, Dry Arabia, Gorge, right? They're not quite as solid as those, but depending on these civs, they can have a place. They can be a great snipe pick against something like like I think Rus they did quite well against, as you said so yourself. I think English they actually do quite well against too. And there's not many other civs in the game on Malian's level that can actually do okay against these kind of better civs. Obviously, OTD they absolutely destroy on land, but we won't see that in tournaments. They do really well against JD, I think, as well.
The next civ is the Ottomans. Ottomans are kind of, to me, not really that ideal anymore when it comes to playing them on ladder. We sort of saw them last season play a role of a fast castle civ, but now they've had a buff again to the military schools, which I think was sorely needed for the feudal age play and the castle age play. In the late game, though, they perform super well both in tournament and ladder play. I am perplexed by this if I'm actually not sure where to place it. What do you think?
It is a tough one for sure. I agree. They've gone through drastic changes in terms of strength and play styles, as you said yourself. For ladder, I would say that they're probably a B tier actually for climbing now. I would say either high C tier or low B tier. Behind Mongols seems fitting for sure.
Let's put them high seats here for now.
Yeah, better than Japanese as well. I'd say like Ottomans is best thing I can compare them to
Yeah.
is a little bit like Ayyubid on ladder, perhaps, where they're
Mm.
slightly timing orientated, but not as much. They're like a strange mix of Delhi and Ayyubid almost, where
Mm-hmm.
they can play feudal quite well, not as well as Delhi, but they're no slouches for sure. They can go fast castle and hit some strong timings, just like Ayyubids, but not quite as well as Ayyubids, right? Obviously, the main difference point from Ayyubid and Delhi is that they actually are very powerful in Imperial Age.
Mm.
It can be tough to play them because they could do quite a bit, but they're not great at any of those things, right? They're not the best in feudal, but they can play it. They're not the best in castle, but they can play it. They're not the best booming civ, but they can boom.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's essentially how they are. They're kind of jack of all trades, master of none. But I think honestly, they're a fine civ for ladder. If you just learn your how to macro effectively in terms of stone, how to base build for get the maximal space from blacksmiths, as well as microing your mechthers,
Mm.
making maximum use of your unique units, because I do think in castle you definitely want to use Sipahi effectively, a very strong raiding unit, their premier unit really. Janissary is very good against cavalry civilizations, of course. Arguably the best unit against cavalry outside of camels, perhaps.
And for the tournament side of things, it's again one of those civs. We've talked about it throughout this video so far. One of those civs that are really good at sniping. They're really good against cavalry civs, specifically like JD, French, Delhi. They can do well against, though they would be on specific maps. I would say against civs like Japanese on land, at least, they can do well, but that matchup almost never happens because Japanese is reserved for water. So I'm not quite sure. I think they don't belong in A tier, and I would probably put them in between Malians and Order of the Dragon if I was to just say it right now. But again, similar to ladder, I'm not sure.
On water in tournaments where there's a decent amount of water maps normally, and especially in the most recent ones, we'll have to see how that progresses. Water Ottomans is not really very effective on full water maps. They can be strong in Castle Age, but usually water maps are decided in Feudal Age, where they just don't
Yeah.
have many bonuses going for them. Whereas on hybrid maps, I think they're a bit better, having access to the first vizier point, giving you either imams or a mechtir can be very effective in those extended Dark Age fights on, against something like Mongols or HRE, maybe in China potentially. So I think they're better on hybrid than on full water, but they're best on land. But they're just middle of the pack, right? Like as we said before, it's quite similar. It's essentially like a late pick in the draft a lot of the time, one of the last picks, second to last, something like that. There's just anything they do, there's usually one or two other civs that they do better, right? So whatever role you have for Ottomans in your draft in mind, there's usually always another civ, either that you do have access to or that you don't have access to, that you'd rather play there instead.
Yeah. Let's go to Jeanne D'arc. JD. One of those civs that I think for ladder play, you're gonna have to help me on this one. It's perfect for the aggression. It's really good at doing damage and keeping up with these fast castle timing civs. Something like Burgrave doesn't really work against them, just like it doesn't work against French as well, because knights do super well and do typically accompany them with archers. But against other civs like Byzantines. It can be good, but it requires a really skilled Jeanne D'arc player. It's kind of the same problem as we spoke about before with French, where people play with too many knights and too few archers. This Civ has some issues in the long game as well. When you're up against these Civ like English, Chinese, HE in the late game, you just simply get outscaled. Even if you have the trade going, you cannot catch up to the massive economies that the other civilizations are outfitted with. So I'm not going to put it in A tier. I don't think I will put it in B tier either. I think it's better than French, but I'm not sure that it's better than Japanese. What do you think?
It really is a tough one, I agree. Definitely better than French, without a doubt. I agree with that one. In terms of better than Japan or Ottomans, I don't think so. I mean, Ottoman, I think, actually destroys JD.
Yeah.
Japanese kind of does well against them too, so
Maybe.
I think below them is probably fine. I mean, they can swap places. I think it's kind of even. The problem with JD is that you get rewarded, like, essentially the entire reward system for your civilization is based on fighting as much as possible.
Yeah.
Which I think is a fine design in at its core concept. I think it's fine to design a civ that way. But the issue you get to face is when you end up going against civilizations, powwow civilizations, where they might not even like fighting in feudal or don't want to, but their economies end up being so superior to yours that they actually run you over even in feudal without even wanting to be there. Notable examples are something like HRE, Byzantines, obviously Rus, even English. Honestly, like it's just so hard to actually crack these civilizations as JD. That even if you do end up getting some XP, maybe a couple of veil kills, some trades here, finding a window to close out the game is tough. Because I mean, like, you're often left at a crossroads. I feel like, do you age up or do you keep committing to feudal? But then it's just tough. It's just tough. Like, you can't really boom with them very well, right? It's a very flippant civilization. So I think C tier is fine for them. Yeah.
Would you say that they occupy the same spot for tournament play?
I would agree. Yeah. I'd honestly, I'd agree that I'd argue they're worse in tournament play than ladder play, because I think aggression can be so powerful on ladder play against players that aren't prepared for it. Whereas, in tournament play, if you have JD in your draft, the opponent will pretty much know what map you want to play it on, and it's going to be an open map, right? Like 99% of cases, JD will be played on something like a Dry Arabia or a Coastal Cliffs, Gorge maybe, where they can, although it's their best setting, they can really struggle against a lot of other civilizations depending on the draft.
Yeah.
Obviously, they're somewhat predictable, like French. The enemy will know you go knights. They're going to know you have JD, and in either form, she's very susceptible to ranged units like archers or knights of the opponents getting pinched by cavalry. So similar spot, just good on land. Water's kind of unplayable with her. One of the later picks in the draft for sure. A bit worse than ladder, I would say.
Okay.
C tier is good with me. Yeah.
The funny thing with JD is I kind of look at the icon and I try to envision that I'm playing her, and I'm gonna try to look for a civ that I want to draft into, and I just go, okay, Malians, no. Ottomans, no. Order of the Dragon, okay, but it's not like super fun.
Yeah.
Mongols, no. English, no. Byzantines, no. It just keeps going like that. It's like, I actually really don't see many situations where this civ can be played and you'll be comfortable.
The only good civ that JD can have a chance against is maybe potentially Delhi, but even that's actually really hard.
Yeah, it can go wrong.
Part of it's just it can go wrong very quickly if you're not careful. And the only reason you have a fighting chance is the knights, right? Delhi has famously struggled against knight civ since its inception. But you're not Rus in terms of economy. You're just slightly better than French. And if JD dies, you essentially lose the game. So
let's jump to the last civ. Myriad, we've almost gone through this all. It will be Zhu Ji's Legacy. For ladder play, Zhu Ji's Legacy for me has been one of those civs that have had tremendous viability on a lot of maps, both water and land maps. And if you're really good at defending, we've seen players like Krakody here take this civ to the extremes, and it just performs super, super well in any aspect of the game, whether it's the Shuganu Rush, the fast castle, or the late game where you might have Shuganus with 14 damage times 3. It's really good. It's a whole different case when we talk about tournaments, but let's stick to ladder for now, and let's probably put her, sorry, not her, Shushi's Legacy in, what do you think, like C tier?
I was gonna say low B tier,
Low
just
B
behind
tier?
Mongols potentially. Yeah, like when I look at Jushi compared to all the civs in C and D on ladder, I think they're actually better than all of them.
Yeah, I could see that.
I think Ottomans can get quite close, but it's complex, right?
Yeah.
Like you're talking, very specific situations in that case.
Hmm.
But I do agree with you. Jushi's actually just a pretty, safe, solid pick in a lot of cases. I think, obviously, Juganus are very powerful
Hmm.
in every age of the game, but for Jushi, especially feudal and especially imperial age, they will do okay on land maps overall.
Hmm.
They have a solid economy with the imperial officials and meditation gardens. They have cheaper TCs, a bit like Abbasid, so they can somewhat boom as well. They have an easier farm transition than China does. I think generally they're actually a little bit simpler to play than China, and
Oh
one of the
yeah.
reasons, that is one of the reasons. Obviously, it's a little bit less safe than China initially because you don't have the Barbican, but your early economy will make up for that.
Hmm.
You can even go fast castle with Yushi in some cases, which can be quite potent, but it can be risky as well. Obviously, they very much shine currently in the map pool. They're probably the best civ without a doubt, really, on Baltic.
And let's talk about tournament play for Shushi's Legacy. It's a civ that's been really popular, not to pick early in the drafting phase, but to have for later when we are picking the last civs. Because if you're good at Shushi on water, your opponent might not be. And it's one of those civs that if you have practiced it, you can use it to tremendous strength on water civs. Most pros obviously know how to play most civs, and if you know how to play Shushi's Legacy, you'll be happy to put it probably in A tier just because of the water dimension of it. But on land and other aspects of it, I don't really see it being played too much. I would probably myself think that this civ belongs in low A tier. I don't think it belongs down here just because of how good it is on water. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. The number one water civ, I would say, right now, in most cases on most maps. They, as you said yourself, they can be tough to pilot on water maps in some cases if you don't quite understand their economy and their
Hmm.
timings, especially right at the start of the game. It can actually be a bit iffy to not idle your dock or your TC if you don't know one of the few build orders as to how to open with them properly. But whenever there's a map like Holy Island or Moving Out, we've seen the Master
Yeah.
of Realms, of course. When these maps are in the draft, you wouldn't be surprised to see Jushi being a ban for both sides,
Oh yeah.
just because of the strength they have on this water map. Just very impressive to playing, and not only in terms of eco and feudal, and for navy on navy battles, but also because of the potential for a boosted castle timing by them, not only due to the build speed, but also the cheaper cost
Hmm.
from the Tang dynasty. Um, so that can make them very oppressive over there. It's kind of like a reversal of Byzantines in a way, where they're incredibly strong on water, not so much on land.
Yeah. Let's take a look and say if we are still really happy with the way that these things are set up.
Mm.
Because I think currently we have made strong cases for our picks. We have a little bit of a crowded A tier over here in the tournament side of things. But I think it seems very balanced over on the ladder side of things.
Yeah.
If you were to change something, what would it be?
Hmm. I think on the ladder side, I would perhaps put French down into D tier above OTD.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I compare it to JD, Japanese, and Ottomans, I think it loses against all of them, to be
Hmm.
honest. I would say. Now, not by too much, because they're all quite difficult civilizations for ladder play in terms of effectiveness as well. I would also say that on ladder, Delhi's just below English, purely because of the difficulty in playing them.
Yep.
Compared to English. But other than that, I think for ladder, it's fine. How do you feel about it?
I think it looks pretty good, honestly. Thinking back to the things we've talked about, I'm looking at the B tier, that feels pretty comfortable. The A tier as well. I think Chinese could be B tier, but I don't mind it being the back of A tier. Ayyubids, honestly, I'm pretty happy with it. A lot of these civs looks great in their spot currently. It's another case when I look at the tournament side of things. I put Japanese very, very high, but I also look back at this and think the top 4 civs here of A tier are great on the water side of things. But if I look at hybrid gameplay in general, I would probably be better off with something like this, where Chinese goes up a bit, Japanese goes down a bit, and then we have talked about how Japanese are different on hybrid maps compared to the more like full water maps, where Chinese obviously outshines. Jushi's Legacy also outshines. I think there's also a case to be made that Delhi, Byzantines, and English could all go to the top of A tier simply because they are more versatile. But I think we could also just keep going on about that, and I think we should just say there's too many variations to say this is the best civ in A tier. I'm gonna have to say that because this pool is so large, it's hard to make a proper order.
Agreed, for sure. Yeah, it just depends so much on maps, right, and the dynamics between the civs on those maps to place them pinpoint accurate. Some will be above others in some cases, some will be below.
Yeah.
Some will be just even despite being on opposite ends of the tiers. Like, if you have Abbasid against Jushi, for example, on a water map, I mean, Jushi should win that quite comfortably in most cases. So there's really a lot of dynamics that pay to consider that make it hard to be, needle accurate with these placements.
Yeah.
But I think overall this will present a very, very good picture of just how the Civ strengths compare one against the other on ladder play and tournament play.
Exactly, and we have to remind ourselves every day that this game has about 256 matchups. Looking at these matchups, and I see something like OCD versus HRE, we saw it on Archipelago, it was not super favored for HRE, it was more even. Whereas civs like French versus, let's say, something like English honestly doesn't feel too bad for French either. So there are so many different combinations in terms of matchups, and they alter this tier list. But on the more overall, like the broad side of things, as an overview, I think this feels good.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Thank you very much for joining me today, Myriad. It was a pleasure to discuss state of the game currently and balance changes and all of those things that we've been speaking about today. It's been a pleasure to have you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I really enjoyed it. This was a great exercise in not only getting us to thinking about them all, but also help out the community as well, and just understanding exactly how the civs compare one against each other and how tournament play differs from ladder play. And hopefully it can be very helpful to a lot of people in educating them, making them, for new players, helping them pick a civ maybe, or just understand somewhat of the dynamics here. So thanks again for having me. It's been a great fun. Looking forward to the next time.
All right, well, we're gonna wrap it up here. Hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Check out the comment section. If you have any questions, I'll be down there. Maybe Myriad will even be down there to answer a few questions. Check him out. I'll post a link to his socials in the description, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
Take care.